that was published by 56 Motorized Brigade, we can see a number of FPV drone attacks on the Russian positions. Some of the episodes were geolocated, and one episode was geolocated exactly in this point, which confirms complete control over this complex network of trenches by the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Ukrainians most likely withdrew their position towards this forest, and this is probably the last island of Ukrainian positions on this side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in the vicinity of Bogdanovka, Kalinovka and Grigorovka. Obviously, this is the next target of the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Russians will try to secure this territory during the next upcoming week and to force the Ukrainians to fall back on the Ukrainian side of Canal, and then the Russians will do the same. They will try to cross Canal Seversky Donetsk-Donbass, and then they will try to attack Chasiv Yar from the north. So most likely this is exactly what we are going to see during let's say late September and early October. Now let's move further. As for Sivir, the Sivir's direction, we haven't received anything special, just a regular activity, the same story. And for the northern Kupiansk direction, just with one exception, we don't have any geolocations, but we have lots of changes on the ground according to different mappers. The pro-Russian sources are saying that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in the southwestern direction from the village of Peshchane. The pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to complete the opposite. They have improved their positions in the northwestern direction of the village of Peshchane. Anyway, this is the Peshchane flower, and the Peshchane flower is blooming, and the more the Peshchane flower is blooming, the more problems it brings to the armed forces of Ukraine. So obviously something interesting is going to happen during the next 2 weeks. Now let's move to the village of Sinkovka. I'll remind you that exactly in this point, yesterday we discussed the video how the Ukrainians were trying to capture Russian soldier, and he used grenade and he blew up himself. And today we got additional report from pro-Ukrainian sources, and according to them, the Russians improved their positions in the vicinity of Sinkovka, but not so far, so deep in direction of Petropavlovka as the yesterday's geolocation show us. So maybe this is the situation, but anyway, the Russians are moving further. Now let's talk about the Kursk direction, where the Ukrainians continue suffering significant losses. Currently, the Ukrainians still haven't managed to stabilize the situation, but they managed to slow down the Russians at least a little bit. We have adjusted the map for additional area. This is it. We are not going to, let's say, we are going to keep the territories that were captured by the Russians until the end of the Kursk counteroffensive. We are talking at this part just to show people, just to have better understanding how much the Russians managed to regain and how many territories left. So as for the geolocations, we have lots of videos on the line between the village of Snagast and Lyubimovka. The videos were published and provided us by the Ukrainian forces, and most of these videos are showing us the Russian attempts to counterattack in direction of Lyubimovka and how many vehicles and the personal carriers the Ukrainians managed to destroy as a result of anti-tank strikes, anti-tank missile strike, and so on. So some episodes took place here. One of the episodes took place here. In this video we can see the movement of Russian BMD the second, and that this BMD was probably got on mine and was destroyed, and maybe destroyed as a result of anti-tank attack. And in this video we can see additional videos of how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian forces exactly in this point with FPV drones, with artillery and different types of weapons. Based on this video, once again, based on these episodes, we have adjusted the entire territory. Furthermore, additional details. According to information we have currently, there are very heavy clashes for the village of Darina. Furthermore, the Russians, according to unconfirmed reports, managed to establish complete control over Tolstolukh. And if we summarize everything, we see that the Russians are have already established control over everything that goes along the river of Snagas. So this is very important, and this is very important because we still haven't received any report that confirms that the Russians managed to cross Snagas river. Currently, this is something like a natural barrier that Ukrainians will try to use to slow down the Russians and not to allow them. And this is the reason why the battle for the village of Lyubimovka is so important, because if the Russians are able to move through Lyubimovka, they will be able furthermore to walk to cross the river of Snagas, and to move further deep inside in direction of Sverdlikova, Lebedekova and Sudzha itself. So this is very important village, and the Ukrainians are not counting losses because they understand if the Russians are able to go through this river, then they're going to have significant problem until they will try to hold these territories until they finish regrouping. But to regroup, the Ukrainians need to bring forces back from, let's say, the village, from the territory of Orlovka, Pogrебki. The Ukrainians need to return back forces from Ruskaya Porечная back to Sudzha, and the Russians are not allowing to do this Ukrainians, and the Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with artillery, with aviation, trying to pin the Ukrainians down, to slow them down, to destroy their vehicles, and the most important right now in this stage of the Russian counteroffensive, to destroy as many as possible fuel trucks. So now this is the most important. Without fuel, the Ukrainians will not be able to regroup. Without fuel, the Ukrainians will not be able to bring additional force and basically even to run away from the Kursk area. So as for now, this is the priority for the Russians. Number one, to destroy as many as possible fuel trucks. Now let's talk about the southeastern part of Sudzha direction. We have another video of very heavy clashes on the territory of village by the name of Borki. We will not watch the video till the end. We will just watch a few episodes at the beginning. Currently, and according to this video, the Ukrainians were trying to repel Russian attacks, but the Ukrainians were defeated. Ukrainians suffered significant losses, and most likely the Russians are about to establish complete control over this village and to continue moving further in direction of Plokhova, which is very important because as for this direction, the main purpose of the Russians is to get inside of the village of Guiva, and then through Guiva to move towards the this part, and this is the border, let's say, checkpoint. And if the Russians are able to get there by this attack, they can create another, let's say, pressure and to create additional part of the Cauldron of the Kursk direction. As for Ukrainian attempts to stabilize the situation, for some reason the Ukrainians decided to counterattack and to attack the Russians in the direction of the village by the name of Glushko. But as I understand, it's already too late. The Ukrainians made few attempts to take under control the village. And the Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainians managed to take under control the village of Veselye, but the geolocations are saying completely opposite. Yes, the Ukrainians did made an attempt to attack, but that attack most likely was repelled by the Russians, or the Ukrainians managed to enter very far from the borderlands, and they lost supply and support roads with the mainland, and they stopped. They stretched their forces between the tree lines and the fortifications, and basically the Ukrainians began bombing Russian positions inside of the village. In this video, for example, we can see how the Ukrainians were conducting reconnaissance operation above the village of Veselye, and how the Ukrainians were bombing the edge Russian defense positions, which obviously confirms that the Russians have strong control over the village itself, and they haven't allowed the Ukrainians to move further in the northern direction.